These are the 5 key points. That people like certainty. They need a certain level of stability and predictability in their lives. But when change comes along, there is great uncertainty, as Steve mentioned earlier, with people worrying about their jobs. People like a sense of purpose. They need to know why they are doing what they're doing. But when change comes along, it can be very unclear as to where the ship is going. People like to feel in control. Not all control freaks, but people like a sense of control over their lives, particularly at work. And sometimes when change comes along, particularly when it feels like it's being implemented from the outside, people feel kind of like helpless victims. Here's another one, connection. We all form connections. We connect to our job role, our profession, our organization, the way we do things around here. We connect to our customers, to our own teams. But when change comes along, a lot of those connections are broken and there's a sense of loss. And finally, we're all motivated to some degree by a sense of achievement. But when change comes along, there's a fear of failure and there's real failure as people try to grapple with new ways of doing things. Exactly, so trust. So if I do this, for example, within a single organization, it's very interesting because I can see how much trust there is in the organization by how many hands go up. And you look, the look on people's faces, the boss has sent an email. You'll know immediately what the level of trust is. And change is about trust. And if you're in an organization where the trust is low, you're already starting one step back. So a huge amount of uncertainty. When you have a combination of uncertainty and something that's very important to you, that's what drives a good deal of stress. So when you're in a situation where you're uncertain about your job, which is slightly important to most people, and the change is taking many months, you're living with a very difficult situation for a long period of time. So you can understand why people are not too comfortable with change. One thing about great leaders is they're about creating certainty in times of uncertainty. So maybe take a look at one or two of these faces that you recognize. Perhaps tell me, if you would, how do they create certainty? Vision, yes. A vision, a clear view of where they are going and where they want people to go.
Stability, the lady's not concerning.
So kind of unswerving direction, yeah? So this kind of sense of purpose, of vision, steadfastness, and great communication. People find it very hard to change if they don't know why. And lots of organizations think, well, hang on, we're the executives, we deal with the strategy. These guys aren't strategists. But they need to know why. Otherwise they can't change, or they find it very frustrating. First off, and this is quite hard, is to have a clear and compelling purpose for change. Very often organizations have very long-winded descriptions of what needs to happen and why it needs to happen, and somewhere in it the key messages are lost. So here's just an example. This was Marks & Spencer's a few years back, said, Plan A, carbon neutral by 2012 because there is no Plan B. The thing I like about that is it's clear, it's motivating, it's challenging, it's linked to their values. It's very empowering to people because it doesn't say this is how you're going to do it, it just says this is where you're going. And so people who are buyers at Marks & Spencer's know they've got to reduce packaging. The guys in the supply chain have got to reduce food miles and they've got to buy these fancy new, low CO2 vehicles. Stores have got to reduce waste. So a very clear and compelling purpose can be a real strong rallying point. What he did was he took a group of people, of kids, and he took them into a classroom and he taught them how to cook. And he held up various vegetables to them and said, what are these vegetables? And they couldn't name. And he's done this in the States, and I saw it recently. We held up a bunch of tomatoes, and one of the kids says, potatoes? So he was asking kids to eat food that they couldn't even name. Suddenly something alien from the outside that was way outside of their comfort. But once they got their hands on things, and they understood it, and they cooked salads and chicken and healthier meals, they felt literally kind of in control. So when these changes happen, these connections, these emotional connections that we have with things, we've always done it like this. I've done it like that for 20 years. Why do you want me to change now? There is an emotional sense of, there's a sense of loss. And most of you will have heard at various times all these sort of different states of emotion and anxiety. People talk about denial and anger and bereavement and so on and so forth, which I won't go through now. It is all sort of genuine stuff, and if you ever go through a major change at work, you will see people in different states, which is all very interesting, but the question is then what do you do? Let's just share with you a couple of fairly straightforward things that will help you through that, which without necessarily having to get into any depth of psychology. The fact that people are actually being listened to and are able to express the fact that there is a level of frustration and a sense of loss or concern gets it out into the open. Sometimes it feels actually not as bad as they thought once they're able to express it. Because in so many organizations you find that those things were never talked about and they've rumbled on forever and a day. In one bank, years later, they were complaining after the merger they didn't have free milk anymore in the kitchens. It's like bizarre, but it was still irked them. This was years later, and you think, well, that would have been a very easy thing. The first thing they say is your swing's all wrong and your grip's all wrong. Instead of holding like that, you need to be like that. So right, now I'm going to try and play with my grip like this. So what happens? You can't do it. You're worse than when you started, aren't you? Yes. So you go out on the tennis court with your friend on the weekend and you have a game, and what happens?
When it's a competitive situation, you go straight back into your comfort zone and do it the old way.
There.
Because you want to win.
Exactly. So what happens in businesses is you invest in coaching, or you invest in new ways of doing things. Yes, we need to become more customer focused. And then what happens when push comes to shove in a competitive situation, when there are deadlines to meet, you say, well, let's revert, let's go back to the comfort zone, yes? I was half decent player before, now I'm losing all the time, at least if I go back to how I did. So what you find is people follow that path. Things get a bit worse, so they go back to where they were before, and then 6 months later say, well, hang on, we invested all that money in customer service training, and we got all this great feedback that the courses were brilliant, but we still seem to be back to square one. So it's kind of the no pain, no gain situation. How do you go through, how do you get people to go through that pain and come out better than they were before? If you are doing all of that, what you're doing the whole time is you're lowering that barrier. You're reducing the resistance to change. It does take investment of time and effort, but if you're going through some of the changes that we've heard about today, mergers, takeovers, wholesale restructures, there's a massive danger that a year later you look back and it's been a disaster. The payoff is in performance, reducing that disruption that can happen and maximizing the upside. That's the bottom line for an organization, is to actually achieve that improved performance and to get return for all that investment that you've made.